Okay, so we have finished this painting and this is completely dry. And so what I'm going to do is carefully remove the tape. Whenever you're removing tape, always pull away so it doesn't tear your painting. And you always want to make sure it's completely dry. If it's not completely dry, the tape is gonna probably tear the paper. I'm going to just lift up this side a little bit. I want to keep the tape there for that other painting, so I'm going to just carefully lift up where this painting is. So we're going to remove this one so we can put another piece of paper on there and start our background of our third painting that we're going to do together. So let's go ahead and get started on our background of this one, and then it can dry while we're working on our tree of the other one. So this one is supposed to meant to be kind of like a sunset with a moon. So, it's right whenever the sun is set. You can kind of decide what colors you're going to have for your background. Like I might even mix it up a little bit from what I have because there is like such a harsh contrast, or it's not a harsh contrast between the tree and the background. And so sometimes it's a little bit hard to see the painting, but you decide. So what we're going to do is the background, and we're going to start with that kind of gestural type of painting that we did on our spheres. I'm going to just keep that right here. Now you can have your moon over here, over here. You kind of decide where you're going to have your stuff. My palette is kind of like a jumble of mess, but I can use some of the colors that I already have in my palette, and I can mix others too. I'm thinking that I might want a purple, but I'm not sure. So I think might want some purple in my composition. So I'm going to take and mix a little bit of a purple. I like to have my colors ahead of time before I start doing this because I have to work fast. And if I don't have my colors ahead of time and I'm working fast, um, you know, things are bound to go wrong. So that's kind of a darker purple. I would like to have kind of a lighter, like maybe a reddish purple, but it'll probably all blend together as we're working. All right, so I'm going to start by you can pick whatever brush you feel comfortable with. I'm going to start using this kind of smaller flat brush, and I'm going to just place where my moon's going to be. Again, this is very gestural, very free. We want to be able to see our marks. And we might have to do a couple coats. So if you do it and you're like, I don't know if I like that, the awesome thing about this paint is that it can layer and layer and layer. This purple's awfully dark. Might want to mix in some white just to kind of keep it a little bit lighter. I want to be able to see my tree later. And so if I make my background super dark, it's going to make it so it's difficult to see my tree later. So trying to keep it so it's not super, super dark. All right, so that's my like first coat, and now is my time to kind of reflect and to decide what I like about it and what I don't, because I can always go and add more layers. So I like the orange going into this darker color, but I'm not sure if I like the transition. So I might fix that up a little bit, and I'm not sure if I like the light blue going into this purple, so I might do some more layers. Okay, so get your background the way you want it, and then we're going to let that dry. While that's drying, we're going to work on our birch trees. All right, so the first thing that I'm going to work on with my birch trees is the basic trunks of my trees. Now for that I'm going to use some round brushes. I have two different sizes. This is kind of medium and this is more of a detail. So I'm going to have both of those handy. Now I need to be careful, I'm right-handed, I need to be careful that I don't put my hand or my arm on this painting while I'm working on my birch trees over here. So I'm going to mix up some grays. I'm going to take some white. Now this paint in the center is kind of dry, so I feel fine about painting right over the top of it. So this is kind of a lighter gray. And then I'm going to have a little bit darker gray over here. Now this is a pretty loaded and gross brush, so before I start painting I'm going to clean it off so I have a little bit more control over it. All right, I'm going to start over here and work to my right, so just keep it so I'm not putting my hand on my paint. So this one does not have any texture, so everything that I do over here is going to have to be implied texture. And I'm going to use my references. Again, I have some photo references here that shows me some birch tree texture. And then I also have my own painting that I can use as a reference. Now I don't want my trees to look flat. I do want them to look like they have dimension. They are round. And so I need to make sure that when I'm painting them, I indicate that they are round. So that means I have to have some value changes. And I kind of need to decide which is going to be my darker side. I'm going to make this side the darker and then the other side the lighter. I'm going to take some of my darker gray and put that right on top of the lighter gray that I just put down. Now I need to blend those two together. When I blend, I'm not actually going to blend in this direction. Because birch trees have more of a texture that goes kind of around them, I am blending in that kind of direction. So I'm using my brush and kind of pushing that darker color in onto the lighter color in kind of like a horizontal wrapping way, going all the way up. And that's going to start to give kind of a birch tree texture to it, all the way up. Now, I like to put in highlights and I also like to put in like kind of darker areas. They have, I don't know if you can see in this picture, they have dark areas. And then we can also have kind of more of a higher highlight. So I'm going to take just some black and kind of sporadically put that kind of going up my tree. Now I'm going to blend this in a little bit. So I have it like that, but I want it to blend a little bit. So I'm going to rinse off my brush and dry my brush so I don't have any of that extra black on there. And then I'm just going to kind of squiggle my brush on top of it, kind of blending it in. Now I went over a little bit into the blue. Well, we're going to add some leaves, so that doesn't really matter. All right, so that kind of is giving some indication that we have some of those like black areas on like kind of rough areas. Now I can also give some highlight. So there's a little bit of water on my page here. I'm going to take some white and kind of just put some white on my right side. Not a lot, just a little bit. And then I'm going to dry my brush off again. And then I'm going to kind of bring some of that white onto the other gray that I have. And I kind of do it in like kind of a scribbly motion, making it look a little bit rough. All right. So we have one tree down. Now this is the implied texture where I didn't have any texture on there. So now we're going to be moving to one of our textured areas. And so it might be a little bit different since we already have texture on there. Sorry, I saw a little place down here that I didn't paint and it's on my paper. All right, so I'm going to start the same way. Now I have a much bigger area on this tree. So if I want to start with a bigger brush, getting that bigger area, I can. So like down here where the trunk is really big, I'm going to use the bigger brush. Just kind of save some time. Now if you feel like, whoa, that brush is just way too big, I can't handle it, well, use a smaller brush. Use what you're comfortable with. Now up here it's starting to get thinner, so I'm definitely running out of paint. I'm definitely going to use a smaller brush where the tree is starting to get thinner, just because I don't want to go completely out of the lines. All right, so you're going to notice right away that it's a lot bumpier than the other tree. All right, I'm putting some of my darker on, and I'm keeping to the same rules as I did on this tree, because the sun should be hitting those trees probably about the same. Like the sun doesn't move spots for each individual tree. So I'm going to put my dark side over there. Okay, I'm rinsing my brush, and I'm gonna quickly drag that over into the tree. All right, and I can do a highlight. I don't know, I'm gonna try doing my highlight first on this one. And then I'm gonna do my dark spots after and see if I like how that turns out better. Again, painting is kind of like a big experiment. If you do try something and it doesn't go right, well, then just redo it, right? You can experiment with the paint and see what it does. And I'm going to blend in some of my highlight here kind of quickly before my paint dries. I'm going to take some black, kind of drag it in some spots, very similar to what I did on my other tree. However, the texture of this tree kind of takes some of those, takes the brush a little bit, and so you'll have it just, it's easier to make the texture whenever there's actual texture on the tree. We are going to add some thinner branches to these, but that's like kind of a second step thing. We're focusing on our trunks first. And I try to kind of look at it and see if there's any spots that I might feel like need some rough areas. Again, trees have very rough bark, and they have a lot of different types of textures on them and values and everything else. All right, I got one more to do. So I'm going to stick to the same plan that I did before. All right, so I am liking my trunks. I feel like they look pretty awesome. So my next step is to do my branches. Now, looking at this picture, right? We can flip it over. All my branches seem pretty dark. They're, I don't really see a whole lot of highlights, and so there's like just a lot of different just dark lines. So I'm gonna stick to using black. Now I am going to switch up though. I am going to switch to my smaller round brush. So I usually like where a lot of times I'll have like little black areas where I kind of attach my branch to my tree, and I can take a little bit of that gray and kind of blend that in so it looks a little bit better. Again, good branches all have to do with your pressure and varying your pressure. So you might start by, putting a little bit of more pressure, and then as you like dwindle it out, you let up on your pressure. It takes some getting used to as far as like how to making your branches look a little bit more like branches. We don't want them to just stop and be nubs. And it might take a little bit of getting used to so that they don't look like nubs. Now, this tree is definitely in the background, so I'm trying to make sure that my branches don't like cross over. And we're going to put a lot of leaves, so I'm not super worried about what my branches look like. Like up here, I know that I'm going to have. So this branch is going to be in front, so I can kind of cross over that tree over there. So before we finish this painting, we need our branches to dry so it doesn't start to get muddy with our leaves. So I'm going to let it dry. Okay, so my painting is dry, so we're going to go ahead and finish this one up. So for this one, I really want some texture on my leaves, like actual texture that I can feel. And so we're going to use a new medium called gel medium. And it is thicker than the fluid medium, but not as thick as the modeling paste. And this can actually be mixed in right into your paint. So I have some red and I have some orange. I don't know if I have enough orange. I might need to bulk that up a little bit. And then yellow. And I'm going to just add some of this with, I'm going to drop some of this gel into those little areas so I can thicken up my paint. So this makes the paint thicker, um, but it doesn't impact the color. So if I were to add modeling paste to my paint, it would definitely impact the color, whereas this keeps the color the same. So it thickens it up, makes it so it's a little bit more textural. Now another thing that I would like to mention is that adding a little bit of white to like my yellow might actually be beneficial, and as far as like transparency. The yellow is just often very transparent and I don't want my leaves to look like you can see through them. So I'm going to add a little bit of that white to my yellow. All right. Now I do have some brown, and I can make more brown as well. There's often browns and leaves and stuff. You can kind of determine what colors you want to be in your composition. Like my example here has yellows, oranges, and browns. I'm not opposed to making a brown here. I do have a little bit of this like orange in here. Let's make that into more of a brown. I don't want it to be too dark. And this is going to be my lowest layer, so I'm not necessarily concerned about the paint being super thick for my lowest layer, meaning it's going to be underneath all the other ones. Now, a very similar technique here to what we used before. You can use a palette knife to apply the paint. I'm going to start with using a brush. I'm hoping that I have enough of this brown color to put on, just kind of plotting out where my leaves are going to be. The first brown layer is never as pretty as all the other layers that we add. Don't be afraid to go paint a little bit over your trunk as well. That kind of adds some realism to your tree. Okay, so this is kind of where I want my leaves to be. I feel pretty good about it. And so now I'm going to start my next layer. It's okay that the colors are going to mix together a little bit because we want them to kind of mix together a little bit. Now, you can use a brush or you can use a palette knife. You can kind of decide, you can try out, both methods. Using a palette knife is a little bit looser. You don't have nearly as much control. But maybe that's the kind of the desired effect that you want. You don't necessarily want to have tons of control because these are leaves and you want them to look messy and maybe the brush gives you too much control. I'm going to mix in every once in a while some red too as I'm putting on some orange. So I kind of like the palette knife method for this because it does keep me a little bit looser. Now with the palette knife, it's tricky to get in kind of these like detailed areas. So that's where I might bring in my paintbrush in a minute. So I can bring in my paintbrush and try to get in some of these detailed areas near my trunk that I don't necessarily want to bring on top of my trunk. I feel like that is good as far as this painting goes. Now, if there's areas that you feel like got some leaves on it that you don't necessarily want to have leaves, you can always go back and touch up with some of your grays and kind of clean up some of those edges. Make sure the paint is dry so then it doesn't start to muddy up and get all mixed together. Okay. All right, so we have finished another painting. So we're going to move on to this painting now. Okay, so for this picture, we are really going to use just basically smooth blending for our tree. Now I like to draw in my tree first. And this is inspired by Laura Iverson. She has these very curly, cute, kind of abstracted trees. And so, just very flowy and that kind of stuff. Now you can decide what kind of tree you want your tree to be. Here we have a tree that is kind of in a sunset and it has kind of cool branches and stuff like that. So I'm going to have my tree, we can kind of draw this in. I know it's going to be a little bit difficult to see what I'm drawing, but I might have a little bit of ground down here, and that's why I kind of made it dark. My tree can kind of come up with the branches and maybe kind of hug or surround my moon a little bit. So be kind of creative when it comes to your tree branches on this. I also like to have some, like, you can have like an animal. I had a cat in mine, kind of sitting and looking up at the tree or at the moon. I like that idea. So maybe I could have an owl here. Make it a little bit different, but I don't know if my owl is going to look like an owl. It might end up looking like a cat again. Um, and if it does look like a cat, I can just add a tail to it, I guess. So kind of draw out, your idea as far as what you want your branches to look like and kind of be a little bit creative. Now I'm going to take just pure black and I'm going to use a kind of a medium round brush and I'm going to paint my tree in pure black. So that's the awesome thing about whenever we do things kind of at the sunset. Most of the time you don't see a whole lot of detail. It's very silhouetted, but we are going to add a little bit of shading to this. It'll be our second layer. So it'll look almost like the moon is causing some shading or a reflection off of our tree and tree branches, and if you have an object. Okay, so I kind of have my first layer here kind of planned out. And so now my next job is to really kind of put some shading on. And I have to think of where my moon is coming from. So my light source is going to be this. And so I have to think about how that hits my objects, which is my trees and my branches. Now I do have some blue options. I have this kind of gray blue, and then I have this. I kind of want to have an in between. I feel like that's a little bit harsh right here, but I feel like that's too dark. So kind of an in between blue that I'm going to have reflecting on my tree. Now, similar to what we did with our spheres, that's kind of what we're going to have as far as our tree shading. I might have a little bit down here, and this could be rough because this is like ground. And I need to blend that in. It looks awfully harsh. So I'm going to take some black and kind of put that right by it, but not on top of it. And then I can take my brush and clean it out and use my brush to blend those two together. So this is the smooth shading that we learned, but it can be gestural too. So that's starting to look like there's kind of this edge that the moon is bringing out. And I'm going to continue up. Now this will eventually just kind of vanish, and then our highlight will be on top of that part. So I think one of the hardest things about this is not the painting itself, but figuring out where your highlight's going to be. Like, where does it shift from one section to another? So we are pretty much done with our paintings. So now you get the chance to explore paint on your own and come up with your own paintings, your own subject, and using the different mediums that we learned about in your own creating.